I watched my younger brother take a seat at the head of my conference table, the table I'd bought with my own money, in the building I'd leased with my own credit, and smile at me like he'd just won the lottery. My parents sat beside him, beaming with pride. That's when I knew. They weren't just taking my company, they were erasing me. What they didn't know was that I'd already started erasing them first. Let me introduce myself. My name is Alexandra Chen, but everyone calls me Alex. I'm 33 years old, and 10 years ago, I built a tech company from absolutely nothing. I'm the kind of person who doesn't give up easily. Stubborn, some would say. Determined, I'd prefer. I've always been the practical one in my family, the problem solver, the one who got things done rather than just talked about them. But being practical doesn't make you the favorite. Being brilliant and charismatic does. And that was never me. That was always my younger brother. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, this story is for you. Hit that like button if you believe revenge is a dish best served calculated. Subscribe because we're about to dive into one of the most satisfying takedowns you'll ever hear. 10 years ago, I was nobody. Not nobody in the existential sense. I had a name, a heartbeat, a college degree gathering dust on my apartment wall, but nobody in the way that mattered to my family. I was just the older kid, the daughter who'd gotten decent grades but not perfect ones, the one who played it safe with a computer science degree instead of shooting for Harvard Business School like my younger brother David was destined to do. I was 23 when I started the company. I remember the exact moment the idea crystallized. I was working a mind-numbing job at a mid-tier software firm, building back-end infrastructure for clients who barely understood what they were paying for. My boss, a man who wore the same coffee-stained polo shirt 3 days a week, had just rejected my proposal for a more efficient client management system. Not because it was bad, he'd actually said, and I quote, "It's probably good, but we don't pay you to think, we pay you to code what we tell you to code." I went home that night to my studio apartment that smelled like ramen and industrial carpet cleaner, and I couldn't sleep. The feeling wasn't anger exactly. It was something sharper, more caustic. It was the realization that I could spend the next 40 years making other people's visions come to life, or I could take a terrifying leap into the void and build something of my own. I chose the void. I used my savings, all $14,000 of it, to incorporate. I worked my day job and spent every other waking hour building the skeleton of what would become a specialized B2B software platform for mid-sized manufacturing companies. The niche was specific: supply chain optimization tools that could integrate with legacy systems. Unsexy as hell, but desperately needed. For the first year, I lived on protein bars and store-brand cereal. I gave up my apartment and crashed on my friend Marcus's couch, paying him what I could when I could. I remember the exact texture of that couch: rough corduroy that left patterns on my face, springs that dug into my ribs at night. I remember staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, my laptop burning hot against my chest, wondering if I was insane, wondering if my parents were right when they'd said, with that special blend of concern and condescension, "That's a big risk, honey. Are you sure you don't just want to get a stable job? Maybe find a nice company with good benefits." David was 16 then, still in high school, already being courted by college recruiters, already the golden child. But I kept building. My first client was a manufacturing company in Ohio that agreed to a pilot program. They paid me $8,000 for a 6-month trial. I remember opening that deposit notification on my phone and actually crying in a Starbucks. The barista asked if I was okay. I told her I'd never been better, and I meant it. That's the thing about building something from nothing. Every tiny win feels like you've summited Everest. Every client, every line of code that works, every problem solved, they all become part of your identity. The company wasn't just my job, it was proof that I existed, proof that I mattered. By year 2, we had 5 clients and hired my first employee, Jake, a brilliant developer who believed in the vision enough to take a pay cut from his corporate gig. By year 3, we'd moved into a real office, a cramped I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building something real while David was just accumulating credentials. I told myself a lot of things that were true and also completely insufficient protection against the ache of being invisible to your own family. By year 7, my company had broken the $1 million revenue mark. We had 42 employees. We'd moved into a modern office space with actual conference rooms and a kitchen that wasn't just a hot plate and a mini fridge. I'd finally paid myself a real salary. I'd bought a car that didn't make concerning noises when I started it. I was proud, genuinely, deeply proud. That's when David graduated from business school. The call came on a Tuesday. My mother, voice bright with that special enthusiasm. David's graduation is next month. We're all so proud of him. And he's been getting incredible job offers. Google, McKinsey, can you believe it? But your father and I were thinking, I should have heard the warning in that pause, the loaded silence. We were thinking it would be wonderful if he came to work with you. It would be so nice to have him close to home. And he has so many ideas about business growth. He did his capstone project on scaling mid-market tech companies. Isn't that perfect? My stomach had dropped, but I couldn't articulate why. It seemed reasonable on the surface. David was smart, educated, connected, and he was family. How could I say no without seeming petty or insecure? I'd have to think about what role would make sense, I'd said carefully. We have a pretty established structure and, he'd be perfect for a leadership position, maybe VP of strategy or operations. He's more than qualified. VP. My company had exactly one VP, and that was Jake, who'd been with me since nearly the beginning and had earned that title through 7 years of loyalty and brilliant work. But I didn't say that. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for exactly 3 days before my father called. Your mother mentioned David might join the company. I think it's a great idea. He could really bring some fresh perspective. You've done well, but there's always room for improvement, right? Strategic thinking, market expansion, that's David's specialty. The implication was clear. I'd built something scrappy and functional, but David could make it great. I caved, not because I was convinced, but because saying no felt like admitting I was threatened by my own brother, like admitting I wasn't confident enough in what I'd built. So David joined the company as Director of Business Development, a title I created specifically for him. The salary was generous, more than I'd been paying myself until recently. My parents contributed a signing bonus for him, which felt weird and paternalistic, but I accepted it because rejecting family money seemed churlish. His first day was in August, and I remember it vividly. He walked into the office wearing an expensive suit, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my first month's rent on that studio apartment. He was confident, poised, handsome in that effortless way some people are. Employees gravitated toward him immediately. He smiled at me, warm, genuine, and said, "Thank you for this opportunity, sis. I'm going to make you proud." And I believed him. God help me, I actually believed him. The first month was fine, good even. David came in with energy and enthusiasm. He sat in on client meetings, absorbed everything like a sponge, asked smart questions. He took Jake and me out for lunch and talked about his vision for market expansion. He was charming, the way gifted people are charming, making you feel like you're the only person in the room, like your ideas matter, like you're on the same team, working towards the same goal. I think we're leaving money on the table in the healthcare vertical, he said over sushi, gesturing with his chopsticks. Manufacturing is great, but medical supply chain management is desperate for solutions like ours. I actually know some people from school who work at major hospital networks. I could set up some exploratory calls. It sounded reasonable. It sounded smart. Let's move carefully, I'd said. We've built our reputation on really understanding our clients' needs. Healthcare is a different beast, different regulations, different pain points. Of course, he'd agreed easily. I'm not suggesting we rush, just that we explore. But exploring turned into pitching, and pitching turned into promises. Within 6 weeks, David had scheduled demonstrations for 3 healthcare systems without fully vetting whether our software could actually handle their specific needs. I found out when one of my senior developers, Maria, came to my office looking stressed. "Did you approve the healthcare demos?" she asked. "What demos?" She'd pulled up her calendar. David scheduled 3 product demonstrations for hospital systems next week. He told the dev team to make it work for healthcare use cases. My jaw had tightened. Our platform isn't configured for healthcare compliance. We'd need months to...
I know, I told him. He said we could customize on the fly and that you'd approved it. I found
He'd looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. Our CFO, Richard, who I'd hired a year ago. Our head of sales, Tracy, who'd been with us for 3 years. Our lead developer, Maria, who'd been there for 5. I trust your judgment, Richard had finally said, looking at me. But I also think David raises good points about growth opportunities. Tracy had nodded. The sales pipeline has been a bit stagnant. New verticals could help. Maria had stayed quiet, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. The new, smart, connected business school graduate versus the founder who'd been scrappy and careful. Who looked like growth? Who looked like the future? I'd canceled the healthcare demos, but I'd lost something more important, the unquestioned authority in my own company. Over the next 3 months, it got worse in ways that were hard to pinpoint but impossible to ignore. David started having casual coffee chats with my key employees. Just getting to know everyone, he said, building relationships. I'd see him in the kitchen, laughing with developers, asking about their career goals. I'd notice him taking Tracy to lunch, coming back with excited energy about new strategic directions. He started CCing my parents on company updates, not official reports. We didn't do those for board members because we didn't have board members. I'd kept the ownership structure simple, but casual emails about wins and opportunities. Closed a deal with a manufacturer in Texas today. Revenue projections looking strong. Had a great strategy session about expansion. So many exciting possibilities ahead. My mother started forwarding those emails to me with comments like, "David is doing such wonderful work. So proud of you both." The "you both" part stung, like we were co-founders, like we'd built this together. I started noticing other things, small things that accumulated like water damage. David would present ideas in meetings that I'd mentioned to him in private conversations days earlier, but he'd present them as his own insights. When I'd point out that we'd discussed it, he'd say, "Oh, did we? I must have been developing the same thought independently. Great minds." And he'd smile, and everyone would chuckle, and I'd look paranoid for pressing it. He started signing emails, David Chen, Director of Business Development, with his Princeton credentials in the signature line. Not unusual, except that none of our other employees did that. It created a subtle hierarchy, him with his pedigree, everyone else with just their names. He started referring to decisions as "we" when I'd made them unilaterally. We decided to focus on manufacturing, instead of "the company has focused on manufacturing." It erased history. It erased me. And slowly, imperceptibly, the culture changed. The company I'd built had always been scrappy, collaborative, unpretentious. We worked hard, but we didn't take ourselves too seriously. We celebrated wins with pizza and beer. We helped each other. We were a team. David brought a different energy, more polished, more ambitious, more corporate. He organized a strategic offsite at an expensive venue with a hired facilitator who led us through vision exercises and talked about maximizing our potential. He pushed for formal performance reviews and stack ranking. He suggested we needed a more sophisticated office space to signal our growth to clients. None of it was unreasonable. That was the poison of it. Every individual suggestion made sense. Together, they were transforming the company into something unrecognizable. Jake noticed. "He's trying to MBA-ify us," he said over drinks one night. We were at our usual dive bar, the kind of place with peanut shells on the floor and sports on every TV, the kind of place that felt real. And I think people are buying it because he seems like he knows what he's doing. He does. It was perfectly crafted, apologetic without actually apologizing, respectful without conceding anything. I didn't respond. I drove home to my apartment, a nice one-bedroom I'd finally been able to afford 2 years ago, and sat in the dark, my mind racing. This was my company, mine. I'd bled for it, sacrificed for it, built it from literally nothing. And somehow, in 3 months, David had made me feel like a guest in my own creation. The truly terrifying part? I could see where this was going. David would continue to charm, strategize, position himself as the visionary while painting me as the bottleneck. My parents would continue to push his agenda, believing genuinely that they were helping both of us. The employees would continue to gravitate toward his polish and confidence, and eventually, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year, there would be a conversation about succession planning, about the future, about who was really best suited to lead the company into its next phase. And I would lose everything, not because I'd failed, but because I'd succeeded just well enough to build something worth taking. I sat there in the dark for hours, feeling something calcify inside me, hurt crystallizing into something harder, something colder. They wanted to take my company? Fine, but they were going to learn a lesson about underestimating me. I just had to figure out how to teach it. The plan started forming the next day, but not all at once. It came in pieces, in quiet moments, in the space between sleep and waking. I've always been good at systems thinking. It's why the company succeeded. I could see the whole picture, understand how pieces connected, identify dependencies and vulnerabilities. I'd built the entire operational infrastructure, knew every contract intimately, understood every relationship. That knowledge, I realized, was power. But I had to be smart, careful, patient. The first thing I did was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I went back to work the Monday after Thanksgiving and acted like everything was fine. I smiled at David. I didn't push back on his suggestions in meetings. I even complimented him on a client pitch he'd developed. "This is really strong work," I told him, and I meant it. It was strong. He was talented. That was what made this so devastating. "Thanks," he'd said, looking surprised and pleased. "I'm glad we're on the same page." We weren't, but I let him think we were. I started doing something I'd never done before. I started documenting everything. Every decision David made unilaterally, every time he presented one of my ideas as his own, every conversation with my parents where they pushed his agenda. I didn't do it obviously, just quiet notes in a private document, dates and details. I also started paying closer attention to the business infrastructure. We used a complex web of contracts, service agreements, and partnerships. I'd set most of them up personally in the early days. Our biggest clients had personal relationships with me, built over years. Our key vendors knew me. Our crucial integrations and IP, I'd developed or overseen all of it. The company was successful because of the people and relationships as much as the product, and those relationships were mine. Then, in early December, the other shoe dropped. My parents invited me to dinner. Just the three of us, they said. They wanted to talk about something important. I knew what it was before I walked in the door. I could see it in my father's overly jovial greeting, in my mother's nervous energy as she served pot roast. We made it through appetizers and small talk before my father cleared his throat. "Alexandra, we want to talk to you about the company's future." I set down my fork. "Okay." "Your mother and I have been talking, and we've been talking with David, and, well, we think it's time to start thinking about succession planning." "Succession planning," I repeated flatly. "You've done an incredible job getting the company off the ground," my mother jumped in. "We're so proud of you, but David has skills and vision that could take it to the next level. He's been doing amazing work these past few months, and we think—" "You think he should run the company?" My father nodded. "Not immediately, but we think a transition plan makes sense. Over the next year or two, gradually shifting leadership responsibilities to David, while I what? Fade into the background? Become an employee in my own company?" "You'd still have an important role," my mother said quickly. "Technical oversight, maybe. Or you could even start something new if you wanted. We'd support you financially." This is the emotional support, the family name, the connections. These things have value. I stared at him. "You think you own part of my company because of emotional support?" "We think," my mother said carefully, "that this is a family asset and that we should make decisions together about what's best for everyone." "What's best for David, you mean?" What's best for the company, my father corrected, and we genuinely believe David is better equipped to lead it into the future. He has the education, the strategic training, the... I built a company from nothing, I interrupted. While David was in school learning theories, I was in the trenches solving real problems. While he was networking at cocktail parties, I was working 18-hour days to make payroll. While he was padding his resume, I was building something actual and real. We're not saying you didn't work hard, my mother said, but David has gifts you don't, and that's okay. Everyone has different strengths. The pity in her voice was unbearable. Here's what's going to happen, my father said, his tone shifting to something more authoritative. We're going to hire a business consultant to evaluate the company and make recommendations about leadership structure. We'll do it properly, professionally, and then we'll make a decision together about the best path forward. I'm not agreeing to that. Then we'll have to consider our options, my father said. We'd prefer to do this cooperatively, but if you're going to be difficult, we'll need to explore what our legal rights are regarding our past financial contributions and... I laughed. Actually laughed. It sounded bitter even to my own ears. You're threatening to sue me for a company you contributed $30,000 to that I repaid years ago? We're saying, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes now, that we want what's best for everyone, for the family, for the business, and we think you're being selfish by not seeing that David could... I stood up. I'm done with this conversation. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice hard now, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Good. Difficult is my specialty. I left, got in my car, drove aimlessly for an hour. They were actually trying to do it. They were actually trying to take my company away from me. The rage was white hot, blinding, but underneath it was something else, a cold, crystalline clarity. If they wanted war, I'd give them war, but I'd win it on my terms. I started the very next day. First, I needed legal protection. I met with a lawyer, not the guy who'd handled my original incorporation, but a shark I found through a colleague's recommendation. I explained the situation in a detached, clinical terms. Do they have any ownership stake? She asked. None. I have documentation proving I repaid every dollar they ever gave me. And your brother. He's an employee, director level, no equity, no ownership stake. She nodded. Then they have no legal standing. This is your company. But if you think they're going to make a move, you need to fortify your position. We spent 3 hours going through the corporate structure, identifying potential vulnerabilities, discussing options. By the end, I had a clear strategy. Second, I needed to understand exactly what I was working with. I spent 2 weeks doing a comprehensive audit of every aspect of the business, every contract, every client relationship, every piece of intellectual property, every key employee relationship. What I found was both reassuring and damning. The company's success rested on a foundation that was almost entirely built on my personal relationships and knowledge. Our top 5 clients, representing 60% of revenue, had contracts with personal relationship clauses. They'd signed on because of me specifically. Our proprietary code base, I'd written the core architecture. Our key partnerships, I'd negotiated and maintained them. David had been there for 3 months. He'd brought some new opportunities, sure, but nothing that had closed yet, nothing concrete. He'd added polish and strategy talks, but the actual value, the real operational guts of the company, was me. Third, I started making subtle preparations. I quietly incorporated a new entity, different name, similar mission statement. I registered it in a different state, kept it completely separate from my existing company. On paper, it looked like a side project, something I was exploring for the future. In reality, it was going to be an arc. I started having very careful conversations with my key employees, not David's coffee chat buddies, the people who'd been there from the early days. Jake, obviously, Maria, a few others who I knew had loyalty that ran deeper than polish and charisma. I didn't tell them what I was planning, Not explicitly, but I asked questions, hypotheticals. If you could build something from scratch, what would you want to do differently? What frustrates you about the current direction we're heading? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I listened more than I talked, and what I heard was illuminating. People were uncomfortable with the changes David had been pushing, the formality, the politics, the metrics-driven culture that was replacing the collaborative environment we'd had. They missed the old days. They were loyal to the company I'd built, not the company David was trying to transform it into. I started having conversations with our key clients too. Casual check-ins, relationship maintenance. How's everything going? Any concerns? Any way we can serve you better? And I'd slip in little questions. If something were to change with the company structure, would you have concerns? Our relationship is important to me personally. Most of them said variations of the same thing. We work with you. The company is great, but you're the reason we signed on. You understand our business. That was the key. They worked with me. I met with our key vendors and partners. Same approach. Relationship building, listening, understanding where the loyalties truly lay. All of this took time. Weeks. I did it slowly, carefully, never revealing my hand. To everyone at the company, I looked like I'd accepted the new reality. I attended David's strategy meetings. I nodded along with my parents' suggestions about the future. I played nice, but I was building an exit plan brick by brick. The hardest part was the waiting, the pretending. David continued to position himself as co-leader. He'd started referring to our company in meetings. He'd begun making unilateral decisions about hiring, about strategy, about positioning. Each time I'd grit my teeth and smile. My parents continued their campaign. They'd invite me to dinner and talk about the transition. They brought in that business consultant who spent 2 weeks interviewing people and analyzing operations. His report, predictably, suggested that fresh leadership with formal strategic training could optimize growth trajectories. Corporate speak for your brother should run things. The consultant had talked to me for exactly 45 minutes and spent 3 hours with David. The fix was in. In mid-January, my father called a family meeting. My parents, David, and me sitting around their dining room table. "We've reviewed the consultant's report," my father said, his tone formal, like he was chairing a board meeting, "and we've made a decision. Over the next 6 months, we're going to transition primary leadership of the company to David. You'll retain an important role, but—" "No," I said, simply. Everyone blinked at me. "No?" my father repeated. "No. This is my company. You don't get to make decisions about it. We've explained our reasoning. David is better suited. David has been here for 5 months. I built this company over 8 years. You don't just hand over something because someone has a better resume. This isn't personal," David said, his voice maddeningly calm. "This is about what's best for the company." "If it's not personal, why does it have to be you?" I shot back. "If I needed to hire someone with strategic expertise, I could hire anyone. Why does it have to be my brother taking over my company?" "Because he's family," my mother said, as if that explained everything. "Because we trust him. Because you've always loved him more than me," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The silence was deafening. "That's not true," my mother whispered. "It is, and that's fine. People have favorites, but I'm not giving up my company because you prefer him." My father's face had hardened. "You're being childish and selfish. We're trying to help you both, and you're making this about your ego. My ego built that company from nothing, and David can take it from something to something truly great. If you can't see that, you're blinded by pride." I stood up. "I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done with all of these family meetings about my business. If you want to discuss anything related to the company, you can communicate with me through my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" David said, looking genuinely shocked. "Come on, we're family. We can work this out." "We're not family," I said quietly. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't spend months undermining each other. Family doesn't gang up to take away someone built with their own hands. "We're not stealing," my mother protested. "We're trying to—" "I know exactly what you're trying to do, and it's not going to work." I walked out. Behind me, I could hear my mother crying, my father shouting something about ingratitude, David saying something soothing about giving me time. I didn't look back. That was February 15th. I had about 3 months of runway before they'd try to make an official move.
3 months to finish building my arc. I spent every spare moment executing the plan. The new company was incorporated, funded with my personal savings. I'd identified the key employees I wanted to bring with me, 11 people total, the core team. I drafted offers for each of them, generous packages that included equity in the new venture. I'd started seeding conversations with clients, not pitches, just relationship building. I've been thinking about starting something new, more focused, more specialized. If I did, would you be interested in hearing about it? 8 of our top 10 clients said yes.
I worked with my lawyer to identify exactly what I could legally take when I left. Intellectual property was tricky. The company owned the existing code base, but I'd written most of it, and I could write new code that did similar things without violating copyright. Client relationships weren't owned by anyone. They were relationships. The contracts had non-compete clauses, but they were narrowly written for competitors in the exact same space, and my new company would be positioned just differently enough to avoid violation. I documented everything. Every conversation, every decision, every piece of David's subtle sabotage. I wasn't planning to sue anyone, but I wanted insurance in case they tried to come after me. By early March, I was ready. The new company had a name, Apex Solutions. It had a sleek website, a solid business plan, and a team ready to jump ship the moment I gave the word. I just needed the right moment to light the fuse. That moment came on March 23rd. The March 23rd leadership meeting was supposed to be routine. Monthly operations review, first quarter performance analysis, the usual spreadsheets and projections. David had added it to the calendar weeks ago with his typical efficient subject line, Q1 review plus strategic planning. I knew it wasn't routine. I'd seen the private calendar invite he'd sent to my parents. I'd noticed the hushed phone calls he'd been having, his office door closed more often than usual. I'd watched him prepare a presentation he hadn't shared with me in advance. This was the ambush, the moment they'd make their move official. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that contained precisely 3 things: my letter of resignation, a 1-page summary of the new company, and a list of clients who'd already verbally committed to following me. The conference room was the nice one, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd always loved this room. I'd held our first investor meeting here, though we'd never actually taken investment, keeping the company privately held, entirely mine. I'd celebrated major contract wins here. I'd built something in this room. David arrived next, surprised to see me already there. "You're early," he said, setting down his laptop. "Seemed important," I replied neutrally. My parents arrived exactly on time, because of course they did. My father in a suit, despite not officially working for the company. My mother carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first month's revenue. "Should we wait for the others?" my mother asked. "Others," I said. David glanced at her. "I thought it would be good to have the full leadership team for this conversation. Jake, Richard, Tracy, they should be here in a minute." Interesting. He wanted witnesses, wanted to make the transition look democratic, sanctioned by leadership consensus. Jake arrived looking confused. "What's this about? The calendar just said Q1 review." "It is," David said smoothly, "among other things." Richard and Tracy filed in. Everyone settled around the table. David connected his laptop to the projector. "Thanks for being here," he started, standing at the head of the table, the head where I used to stand. "I know this was short notice, but I wanted to bring everyone together for an important conversation about the company's future." He clicked to the first slide, Strategic Transition Plan. My stomach was ice, but I kept my face neutral. Over the past 6 months, I've been assessing our operations, our market position, and our growth potential, and I've identified some significant opportunities that require strong, focused leadership to execute. Click. Next slide. A graph showing projected growth under current trajectory versus optimized leadership. He continued, "We've done well, but we're leaving substantial value on the table. The market is evolving, and we need leadership that can evolve with it." Jake glanced at me, eyebrows raised. I gave him a tiny shake of my head. "Wait." "Which is why," he said, his voice taking on that confident, inevitable tone he did so well. "With the support of key stakeholders," he gestured to our parents, "I'm proposing a leadership transition. Effective June 1st, I would assume the role of CEO with full operational authority to execute the strategic initiatives we've identified." Click. Next slide, New organizational structure.
his name at the top, mine nowhere to be found. "This isn't a reflection on anyone's past contributions," he said, looking directly at me now. "It's about positioning the company for its next phase, and I'm excited about what we can accomplish together." The silence was thick. Jake looked furious, Richard looked uncomfortable, my mother was beaming. "That's quite a presentation," I said, calmly. "Can I ask who the key stakeholders are who supported this decision?" "Your parents and I have discussed it extensively. They've been invaluable advisors." "Advisors? To what, exactly? They don't work here. They don't own any part of this company. On what authority are they advising a leadership change?" My father cleared his throat. "You're our family. We have a vested interest in seeing both of you succeed." "You have an interest in seeing David succeed," I corrected, which is touching, really. "But this is my company. I founded it. I own it. And I'm not handing it over because you decided your favorite child should have it. That's unfair," my mother said, her voice wavering.
Is it? When have you ever been this involved in my business decisions before? When have you ever sat in on a strategic meeting? When have you ever pushed this hard for anything I wanted? "This isn't about favoritism," my father said sternly. "This is about competence. David has proven that he can make a good PowerPoint," I interrupted, "that he can charm people and talk about strategy. But he hasn't built anything. He hasn't closed a single major deal. He hasn't actually done anything except position himself to take credit for what I built." "That's not true," David said, his composure cracking slightly. "I've been working incredibly hard to take my company," I finished. "Yes, I noticed." Jake spoke up. "Can I just say for the record, this is insane. You don't just walk into a company and declare yourself CEO 6 months later. That's not how any of this works." "Unless you have leverage," I said, looking at my parents. What was the leverage going to be? Emotional manipulation? Threats about legal rights to contributions that were repaid years ago? Making my life miserable until I gave in? "We're trying to help you," my mother insisted. "You're too emotional to see that this could be good for everyone. You could focus on the technical side, which you love, and David could handle the business side." "I don't want to be demoted in my own company," I said. Each word came out sharp, precise. "I don't want to watch someone else take credit for my work. I don't want to be a supporting character in my own story." "Then what do you want?" David asked. He looked genuinely confused, like my resistance was incomprehensible. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the letter, slid it across the table to David. "I want to resign, effective immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. David picked up the letter, scanned it, his face going pale. "You're quitting?" "I'm leaving, and I'm taking some things with me." I pulled out the second document, the summary of Apex Solutions. "Over the past 3 months, I've been building something new, a company that focuses on the aspects of this business I actually care about, specialized supply chain optimization with a more boutique, high-touch approach. I've already secured commitments from several clients, and I've made offers to key team members." Jake was grinning now. He'd known this was coming. I'd brought him into the plan 2 weeks ago. "About time," he muttered. "You can't do that," my father said, his face reddening. "That's theft, corporate espionage. You're stealing clients." "I'm not stealing anything," I said calmly. "I'm leaving a company where I'm no longer wanted, and I'm starting fresh. The clients I've spoken to have personal relationships with me. They're free to work with whoever they choose. That's called business." "We have non-compete clauses," David said, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "You signed a non-compete that's very narrowly written and specifically excludes adjacent market positioning with differentiated service offerings. I had a lawyer review it. I'm not competing. I'm offering something different to clients who happen to already know me." Richard spoke up carefully. "How many clients?" I slid the third document across the table, the list. David grabbed it, scanning down. His face went from pale to ashen. "This is 60% of our revenue base. 63%, give or take. These are clients who've worked with me personally for years, who trust me, who, when I told them I was starting something new, asked how they could be part of it." "You can't,"
my mother whispered. You can't destroy what you built. I'm not destroying it. I'm taking what's mine, the relationships I built, the trust I earned, the reputation I established. You wanted David to run the company? Great. He can run it. With the clients who stay, the employees who choose to remain, the contracts he can maintain. This is sabotage, my father said, his voice shaking with rage. This is vindictive and petty and this is business, I interrupted. You wanted to treat my company like a corporate asset to be redistributed according to your preferences. Fine, but you forgot that the value wasn't in the entity, it was in the people, the relationships, the knowledge, and most of that is walking out the door with me. I stood up, buttoning my blazer. Jake, Maria, Alex, Jennifer, you have offer letters in your email, 20% above your current salary, equity stakes in the new company, and the chance to build something without the politics. If you want in, let me know by end of week. Jake stood immediately. I'm in. Been in since you told me. Let's do this.
I looked at Richard and Tracy. You're welcome to stay. I'm not trying to blow up the whole company, but I wanted you to know the situation. Tracy looked between me and David, clearly doing calculations. I need to think about this. Richard nodded slowly. Me too. I turned to David. You wanted to run a company. Congratulations, you're running one, with whatever's left after the exodus. I'm sure you'll do great things with your strategy presentations and your business school education. This is because we didn't think you were good enough, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. No, I said, this is because you tried to take something that wasn't yours. There's a difference between thinking someone isn't good enough and actively undermining them to steal what they built. You crossed a line. All of you did. I looked at my parents. My mother was crying. My father looked apoplectic with rage. I hope he was worth it, I said. I hope, knowing that you backed the wrong horse, that you destroyed your relationship with your daughter for someone who's about to run a gutted company into the ground, I hope that keeps you warm at night. You're being cruel, my mother sobbed. I'm being honest. For the first time in months, I'm being completely honest. You made me feel worthless, made me feel like everything I accomplished didn't matter because it wasn't accomplished by your favorite child. You tried to erase me from my own story, and now you're upset because I'm writing a different ending. I picked up my portfolio. My lawyer will be in touch about the transition logistics. I'll be moved out of my office by Friday. Good luck with everything. I walked toward the door. Jake followed. This isn't over, my father called after me. We'll sue you. You'll do nothing, I said, turning back, because you have no standing, no ownership, no case. You're just three people who overplayed their hand and lost. I walked out of that conference room for the last time, Jake beside me, and felt a weight lift that I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying. Behind me, I could hear David's voice, shaky now, trying to salvage something. Okay, let's all take a breath. We can work through this. We can... The door closed on his voice. In the hallway, Jake laughed, a sharp, exhilarated sound. Holy shit, Alex, that was brutal. That was necessary, I corrected. We walked past cubicles where people were working, oblivious to the nuclear detonation that had just occurred in the conference room. Some of them would get offer letters from me, some of them wouldn't. By next week, the office would look very different. Maria caught my eye from her desk. I nodded once. She nodded back. She'd already accepted her offer that morning. How many do you think will come? Jake asked as we headed to the elevator. Enough, I said. The ones who matter. The next 72 hours were chaos. David tried calling me 17 times. I didn't answer. My mother left tearful voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart, and couldn't I see I was being manipulated by my hurt feelings? My father sent emails, CCing his lawyer, threatening legal action for breach of fiduciary duty, theft of corporate assets, tortious interference with business relationships. My lawyer sent back a polite letter outlining exactly why none of those claims had merit and suggesting they conserve their legal fees.
By Friday, 11 employees had given notice, 11 out of 42. But they were the right 11, the senior developers, the lead project manager, the key account managers who had direct relationships with major clients, the ones who'd been there from the beginning, who remembered what the company was before David tried to transform it into something else. Richard, surprisingly, was one of them. He sent me an email Thursday night. "I've been thinking about what you said, about relationships and trust. I came to this company because I believed in what you were building. I still do. Count me in." Tracy stayed with David. So did about half the development team. Some people valued stability over loyalty, and I didn't blame them. But the core team, the people who'd made the company what it was, they came with me. The clients were even more decisive. 8 of our top 10 clients signed letters of intent with Apex Solutions within the first week. They sent apologetic notes to David, professional and courteous, thanking him for his time, but explaining they had existing relationships they wanted to maintain. 2 of the smaller clients stayed. 3 new prospects David had been courting went dark, probably spooked by the instability. By the end of March, Apex Solutions had $2.4 million in committed annual contracts, 11 experienced employees, a lean operational structure, 0 debt, and 0 family drama. The old company had about $1.5 million in remaining contracts, some of which were likely to churn at renewal. 31 employees, many of whom were now nervous about stability, a beautiful office space that was now too big, a CEO with a great resume and no operational experience, and my parents' support, for whatever that was worth. I didn't hear from David directly for 3 weeks. When he finally called, I was in the middle of a client meeting at our new office, a smaller space, definitely a step down in terms of aesthetics, but it was ours. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 7 minutes long. "I don't even know what to say," he started. "I'm angry, I'm hurt, I feel betrayed," which I know is rich coming from me, "but I genuinely thought we could build something together. I genuinely thought I was helping." A pause. Sound of him breathing. "Mom and Dad are devastated. They don't understand why you're doing this. And honestly, neither do I. Was it really so impossible to share leadership, to work together? Did you have to salt the earth on your way out?" Another pause. "The company is struggling. You knew it would. You took everything that mattered and left us with a shell. And I'm trying to hold it together, but I don't have your relationships. I don't have your history. I'm figuring out in real time that a business degree doesn't actually teach you how to run a business that someone else built." His voice cracked. "I thought you were being paranoid. When you'd push back on my ideas, when you'd get defensive for credit, I thought you were being insecure. But you were seeing something I couldn't. You were watching me dismantle what you'd built, and I was too arrogant to realize."
Jake poked his head in. "Client meeting in 5. You good?" "Yeah," I said, deleting the voicemail. "I'm good." Was I being cruel? Maybe. Was I being unforgiving? Probably. But I'd built something beautiful and they'd tried to take it from me. Not out of malice, perhaps. Out of entitlement. Out of the fundamental belief that they deserved it more than I did. And now they were learning what happens when you underestimate someone. 6 months later, Apex Solutions had grown to 18 employees and $4.2 million in annual contracts. We'd expanded into 2 adjacent verticals. We'd developed 3 new product features. We'd built a company culture that felt like the early days of my first startup, collaborative, hungry, real. I'd started dating someone I'd met at an industry conference, someone who knew nothing about my family drama and liked me for who I was, not what I could give them. I'd bought a house, nothing extravagant, but it was mine, bought with money I'd earned from something I'd built. I was happy, actually genuinely happy. The old company, meanwhile, was circling the drain. I didn't take pleasure in it exactly, but I didn't not take pleasure in it either. David had managed to close 1 decent-sized contract, but he'd lost 3 others at renewal. The company had laid off 8 employees. They'd had to move to a cheaper office space. My parents had actually invested more money to keep it afloat, throwing good money after bad.
I heard through the grapevine that David was looking for a buyer, that he was trying to salvage something, anything, before the whole thing collapsed completely. I heard my parents were no longer speaking to me, which was fine. The feeling was mutual. I heard my mother had told relatives I'd stolen my brother's opportunity, which was such a fascinating rewrite of history that I almost admired the audacity. But none of it touched me, not really, because I'd learned something crucial through all of this. The people who truly believe in you don't try to replace you. They don't see your success as a platform for their ambition. They don't love you conditionally based on whether you're useful to their favorite child. Real relationships, real family, doesn't work that way. A year after the detonation, I got a LinkedIn message from David. The company is closing. We're selling the remaining assets and contracts to a competitor. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it elsewhere. I know you probably don't care, but I wanted to say thank you for the lesson. It was expensive and humiliating, but I learned something important. You can't strategy your way through running a business you don't understand. You can't charm your way through relationships you haven't built. And you can't take shortcuts to success that someone else earned. I'm taking a job at a consulting firm, starting at the bottom, doing the work I should have done before I ever tried to run a company. Maybe someday I'll build something of my own, but if I do, I'll do it right this time. I hope you're doing well. I hope Apex Solutions is everything you wanted it to be, and I hope someday you can forgive me, even though I'm not sure I deserve it. I read the message 3 times. Then I closed LinkedIn and got back to work. There was a certain poetry in it, I suppose. The company I'd built from nothing, that they'd tried to steal, that they'd briefly possessed, it was gone now, dead, dissolved into assets and contracts sold to strangers. But I was still here, still building, still creating value from nothing but vision and work. Apex Solutions had just signed its largest contract to date. We were hiring 5 new people. We were expanding into a new office space, bigger than the old one actually, but we'd earned it this time. And I'd done it all without them. That was the real revenge, I realized, not the destruction of the old company, not the loss of relationships or the damaged pride. The real revenge was succeeding without them, building something even better than before, proving that I didn't need their approval, their support, or their belief in me to create something valuable. The real revenge was being happy while they picked up the pieces of their own miscalculation. Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in my house, I think about that Thanksgiving dinner, the moment when my father said David had vision and I'd been too cautious. I think about all the moments before that too, the times my accomplishments were met with, "That's nice," while David's were met with celebration. The subtle messages that I was fine, but he was exceptional. The ways they'd trained me over decades to believe I was the lesser child. And I think about how close I came to believing them. If they'd been just a little more subtle, a little more patient, they might have succeeded. I might have internalized their narrative, might have stepped aside, might have let them take what I'd built and convinced myself it was for the best. But they'd overplayed their hand, moved.
2 years after the detonation, Apex Solutions crossed $10 million in annual revenue. We'd been approached by several VCs interested in funding an expansion. I'd turned them all down. The company was privately held, profitable, growing sustainably. I didn't need to answer to investors or board members or anyone who might try to tell me how to run what I'd built. I'd learned that lesson already. Jake was COO now. Maria was VP of Product. Richard was CFO. The team that had followed me out of the burning building had built something new together, and everyone had equity stakes that would make them genuinely wealthy when we eventually exited. We weren't just successful, we were successful together, in a way that felt earned and real. I dated someone seriously for the first time in years. He'd met my colleagues at a company dinner and later told me, "They talk about you the way people talk about someone they actually like, not just someone they work for. That's rare." It was rare, because I'd built it intentionally this time, with the hard-won knowledge that culture and trust mattered more than growth metrics or impressive resumes. I saw my parents exactly once in those 2 years, at a cousin's wedding. They sat on the opposite side of the venue. My mother cried when she saw me.
My father looked older, diminished somehow. David wasn't there. I heard he was living in Chicago, doing well at his consulting job, working his way up properly this time, learning the skills he should have learned before trying to run a company. I hoped he was happy. Genuinely, I didn't hate him anymore. Hate requires energy, and I'd found better things to do with mine. But I didn't forgive him either. Forgiveness felt like something he wanted for his own peace, and I wasn't interested in providing it. He'd made choices. He'd lived with consequences. That was enough. At the wedding reception, my aunt, my mother's sister who'd always been kind to me, pulled me aside. "Your mother misses you," she said gently. "She talks about you all the time, about how much she regrets everything." "That's nice," I said neutrally. "Maybe you could call her sometime? Tried to rebuild?" I looked across the room at my parents, sitting together, looking small and sad. "I don't think so," I said. "Some things can't be rebuilt. Some betrayals are too fundamental." "They're your parents," my aunt said. "They love you." "They loved the idea of me," I corrected. "The version that didn't threaten their favorite. The version that would step aside gracefully and let David have what I built. But they didn't love the actual me, the person who fought back, who refused to be erased." My aunt didn't have a response to that. I hugged her goodbye and went back to my table, where my boyfriend was waiting. We left early, drove home, ordered takeout, and watched a movie. It was a good life, a life I'd built deliberately with people who chose to be in it. And that, I realized, was the final chapter of the revenge. Not destruction, not even vindication, just living well, building something beautiful, succeeding on my own terms with people who actually valued me. They'd tried to take my company, and in the process, they'd lost me. I'd lost them too, but I'd gained something better, the certainty that I could build anything I wanted with anyone I wanted, and no one could take it from me unless I let them. I'd never let them again. That's the thing about betrayal. It teaches you exactly who people are when their interests conflict with yours. My family showed me their truth, and I showed them mine. If you've ever had to walk away from people who underestimated you, drop a comment. And if you believe the best revenge is building something better and leaving them to watch from the outside, hit that subscribe button. Because that's exactly what we talk about here. Stories of people who refused to be erased, who fought back smart, and who won on their own terms. Thanks for listening to this one. See you in the next story.